Hi, everyone. I am Entertainment Weekly editor Carla Sosenko. I am so thrilled to be talking to you today and joining in creative company to talk to Jeremy Ford, the star of many different things, but most recently Fear Street. Jeremy, how's it going?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm really excited to talk to you about a lot of the different projects that you have going on, but specifically Fear Street. I'm guessing everyone watching has seen all three films, and they are so good and so twisty and surprising. And just, I want to just start by saying, obviously, they're based on R.L. Stine's beloved books. Had you been a fan of the books when you got approached about this role?
If I could go back in time, Carla, I would read them because that's the first question everybody asked me. And unfortunately, I did not read them growing up. I was like, of course, super familiar with Goosebumps and R.L. Stine.
Yeah.
But I was like I was a really shy kid, like hide behind my mom's leg, shy. So with that, I was like also like just so afraid. Like I did not like being scared. You know, it was the last thing I wanted. And I had an older sister who loved scary movies. It was terrible. So I stayed clear from anything R.L. Stine. That said, you know, being familiar with Fear Street now, I now know how important these books are to like so many people. Like once I came onto the Fear Street movies, I started talking to people about Fear Street, and almost everyone I've talked to are like, "Oh my God, loved those books when I was a kid." And I was like, "Oh damn, I feel like I missed out on something."
Well, you've kind of made up for it by now being in the movies based on Fear Street, I think.
Thank you. I needed to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Okay, good.
The structure of the trilogy, so it's super interesting. There are three different films. The first film is 1994. The second film is 1978. The third film is 1666. You appear as two different characters in the first film and the third film. Now, what was so interesting to me about the casting of all three movies is that almost every actor plays more than one role in more than one film. And I'm curious, as an actor, for you, what that was like, not just playing two different roles in connected stories, but also working with other actors who were playing multiple roles in connected stories.
Yeah, it was uniquely challenging because when I first came on to the Fear Street movies, I knew I was playing two different characters in two different time periods. And like, I didn't understand why, you know, like they hadn't sent me the scripts yet. And I was like, okay, I guess I have to do the actor thing and just like fill in the blanks in my own head and make it make sense. And then they finally sent me the scripts, and then I finally understood it. And it was overwhelming at first because I'm like, all of a sudden I have two scripts to memorize, and it was like a lot. Like the first week I was sort of like panicking. Then at a certain point, I'm just like, okay, you know what? I have to treat them as two different characters because that's what they are. You know, Peter and Caleb, they might look the same and sound the same and have similar sort of angry demeanors, but they are different guys. They have different motivations. They're coming from different walks of life, obviously 300 years apart.
Yeah.
So once I made the distinction, like, okay, I have to treat them like two separate parts. I'm going to memorize these lines, come up with this guy's backstory, put all the work into him, and then do the same for this guy. That's when it got a lot easier. And that's when it like started to get exciting and the puzzle pieces started to fall into place.
Okay. And so how did you shoot? Like, what was the order of, did you shoot the first film before you, like in totality, before you touched the third film, or were you kind of going back and forth?
Yeah, I know that this isn't the case for everybody, but for me, I got to film all my stuff for the first one first. And then we went immediately to the third one. And then after they wrapped the third one, they did the second one.
Oh, wow.
And I know in that some of the like Kiana and like Ashley Zuckerman, I think they were kind of all over the place because they sort of like, I can spoil stuff here. I forgot.
You can.
Because they wrap up the trilogy. So they're like, they were back to the 90s, like so they were doing the 1600s and they have to go back to the 90s and do some stuff to like wrap it up. And it was really confusing for them, but I dodged that bullet.
Yeah, it gets super confusing. And I would say with Ashley Zuckerman's character in particular, even though they're just a couple moments, there are moments where you kind of see him like through many, many generations.
Yes. Yeah.
And yeah, I give major props to the stage manager on this production. I think it must have been unreal.
Totally. I give huge props to like everybody because doing what they did, filming three movies back to back to back. I mean, starting with like the studio for green lighting that with like a largely up and coming cast, huge props, and like what a swing for them to take. But then, you know, Lee Janiak, our director, the cinematographer, the whole crew, they did not stop working. And like, God bless them, because I think their hard work really shows on screen.
Oh yeah. Yeah. There's so much continuity. It's really, I mean, for anybody who's tuning in now and hasn't seen it, I really can't recommend it enough. And I will say, you know, I'm only comfortable saying this because you kind of set us up for it. You do not play very nice guys.
Yeah.
They are not the most pleasant men in the world. And I'm always curious for actors who play not so nice guys, what is that process like? How do you find the humanity in a character who, on the face of it, I would say neither Peter nor Caleb seems to have any redeeming quality.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
That's harsh. But as an actor who's going to play those parts, what is that like for you?
At a certain point, you know, like when I'm prepping for any role, I always like, it sounds sort of hippy dippy, but it is what it is. I always journal like in character, kind of from like the earliest memory of that character up until like present day. And it's actually wild. It's sort of like the fastest way to like fabricate these memories that start to feel real after a while. And that sounds bizarre to someone who's not an actor, like anyone listening. But so for me, it's like there's always a key to, because you're right, I do play bad guys often, even like I'm in the show The Mosquito Coast. I have a small role in that, but I play a terrible person in that. And like my parents are like what, like why do you can you play someone that we're gonna like show our friends and be proud of our son? That's a joke. They are proud of me. There's always a key at a certain point. And like for Peter, the key was like, okay, it's 1994. He's the sort of I saw him as like the mirror of society at that point. Like he's the guy who wouldn't understand like a queer relationship. I mean, this is a studio trilogy with a queer love story front and center, which is so special and unique. But in 1994, like that was not popular. And that's kind of the point of Peter. Peter is like the high school hotshot football player who the cheerleader should be dating. Like the cheerleader should not be dating a girl, you know, like that was not cool back then.
Yeah.
So to me, like the key to playing Peter was like, okay, I understand his place in the story. He's sort of reflective of society at the time. And, you know, being a product of the 90s like myself, it's like, you know, you grow up and there's a generational difference between like me born in the 90s and my dad born in the 60s. Like my dad's a very hands-on blue collar gruff guy who's like slow to show emotions or vulnerability. And I was a really terribly shy, sensitive kid, but that does something to you. And in Peter's case, I sort of made his backstory. Like he comes from like an abusive home and, you know, he doesn't have control at home. So in his real life, like in his social circles, he finds control in like being an asshole and putting people down, you know. And then with Caleb, it's the 1600s and it's early puritanical America. The key to Caleb was like religion, you know, like those societies back then in their settlements, they were so like driven by religion, and religion in the wrong hands is so scary and dangerous. So when I came up with that for Caleb, I'm like, oh, that's the key. That's the home run to make Caleb so skeevy and terrible.
Yeah. And I mean, I think, so it's funny because as someone who was in high school in 1994, it really, really resonated with me because I think it's really amazing. You were born in the 90s. I think that you got it completely right. That was a real turning point in terms of kind of realizing that I will never forget that in my high school newspaper, somebody came out of the closet and the editors or the teachers were so fearful for him that they would not let him put his name on the byline. I mean,
wow.
That's 1994. And, you know, we forget, I think we take for granted because in so many ways we haven't made progress, but just in terms of like millennials and Zoomers, like the amount of progress we've made in terms of gender and sexuality and all of that is like so gorgeous. And the fact
Totally.
that, like, that's front and center in Fear Street, it really is. At its heart, it's a horror movie, but it's a queer love story.
Totally. Yeah. And like, you're right. We still have so much work to do, but like we are moving in the right direction, which is, it's really important to like, at least acknowledge that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say, we don't get to see as much of Peter as we do of Caleb, but I do think that with Caleb, I will retract what I said in that I do think you see his humanity because you at least see that he feels rejected. You know where his pain is coming from, at least, you know? And so yeah, I'll give Caleb a little break.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's funny, like, that scene you're talking about when Caleb gets rejected. Obviously, we're all adults. There's an erection scene in that, and in real life, filming that, I knew what I was getting myself into, obviously, and I'm going to divulge too much information, but I think that's why we're here. On the day, like the prop guy comes up to me and he's like, okay, you got 3 choices here as far as like prosthetic, and I'm like, oh man, I'm like, if I'm being completely honest with myself about like Caleb, it's like I got to go with the small one, like and the prop guy, who just he's not really as involved in the story as me. He's kind of like, are you sure? Like, you don't have to. I'm like, no, I think that's the honest way to go. And on the day, it's like when we're filming that scene and like all the people are around the campfire, and it's like, the 1600s, everyone's sort of like drinking the applejack, eating the berries. Everyone's kind of high. Then at a certain point, everyone turns and looks at me and laughs. Everyone makes fun of me. And in real life, like when all the extras turned and pointed and laughed at me, my face got flushed. My heart was racing. I was like, genuinely mortified. It was like what you're seeing on camera is like such a real reaction. Like I knew they were going to laugh at me, but like actually being there, I'm like, oh wow, maybe like I was a fortunate kid and like I never got laughed at to that extent, but that sucked. Even though it was fake, it still sucked.
Yeah. Oh, I bet, because I'm sure the humiliation feels real.
Yeah. Or and credit to the extras for like having good authentic laughter and like pointing at my choice in prosthetics.
I'm going to be honest here and tell you that I'm happy you brought it up, because when I was when I was watching the third film, I said to my friend that I was watching it with, I was like, I want to ask him about this part, but I don't think I can. I don't think I can. And so I'm glad that you brought it up and we addressed it, because it's a funny moment where you're like, oh my God.
Yeah. Hey, I'm happy to bring it up. So yeah, don't pull your punches. I can handle it.
Thank you for doing that. I want to talk a little bit about the Mosquito Coast, because you also mentioned that. So the Mosquito Coast, it's interesting because era-wise, it's in that same era, at least as the first, the Fear Street books, I would say.
Right.
First there was the book by Paul Theroux, and then there was the film. Those were both in the 80s. And then of course, Justin Theroux, who's in Mosquito Coast with you, who's related to Paul Theroux. There's so many interesting connections. Same era. Tell me about what that experience was like of filming Mosquito Coast and how that's been.
Yeah, that was a post Fear Street, even though Mosquito Coast came out before Fear Street. And, it's a pretty small role. I'm sort of in and out, but that was a big deal for me just personally as an actor, because, I've been doing this acting thing for like a decade, and booking Fear Street was like so validating. And it was kind of like my first big break. And, Victoria Thomas, the casting director who cast for Mosquito Coast, she's like such a heavy hitter in the casting world. And she casts for like all of Quentin Tarantino stuff. And she's a beast. And like, she's like super intimidating. So like getting that audition, my agent was like, hey, just so you know, like, she's no bullshit. Like she's tough. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, thank you. I appreciate the heads up. And I went in the audition, and, sure enough, I booked it, and Victoria Thomas was like fantastic. And working on the Mosquito Coast, it was so much fun. I mean, Rupert Wyatt directed the episode I was in, and he's such a fantastic director. He did like the remake of The Gambler with Mark Wahlberg. He did Rise of the Planet of the Apes. He's a tremendous director, but Justin Theroux is like a personal hero of mine. And like the fact that I got to share my scenes with him, it really meant a lot to me. Mainly because he's such a fantastic actor, but completely removed from his acting career is his like writing career. He's written screenplays that he has nothing to do with acting wise. Like he wrote Tropic Thunder. He wrote Iron Man 2. It's like, it's such an eclectic career that he has. And like, that's really what I want for myself. Like I really enjoy writing, but I don't necessarily always want my writing and my acting to overlap.
Yeah.
So working with Justin Theroux was like, yeah, it was a bit of a dream come true for young teenage Jeremy.
Yeah. So you are actually in post-production now, I think, on a film that you did write and do act in. So Way Down Bundy, you co-wrote with your wife?
Yeah. Well, you did your research. We're in pre-production. We haven't shot it yet.
Okay, it's in pre-production, not post.
Yeah.
So I didn't do my research. You jinxed me. I did my research, but I got it wrong.
I'm still very impressed. You got the name and everything.
Well,
yeah. So
tell me about that.
Yeah. So right when I came off the Mosquito Coast, COVID happened, and this was like March 2020, and the world shut down. And at the time, we all thought like 2 weeks we were going to be like locked in our doors. And my wife was like, okay, cool. We've got however much time. Like, we've always wanted to write something together. I've written a few screenplays myself. Like, oh, let's just take this time and write something. So we just started like dabbling. We came up with this story and we started writing it. And then, as we all know, the lockdown just kept going forever. And we ended up writing like a feature film screenplay that we were like super proud of. And to be honest, when we wrote it, we're like, oh, maybe we'll raise 20 grand or 50 grand and just do it ourselves with our friends on like a stupid low budget. But we ended up so proud of it. We're like, oh man, it'd be a shame to do it for $50,000. Like, it wouldn't do the story justice in our opinions. So at the beginning of this year, we actually went out to like seek independent financing, and we got it, which is incredible. Like, we raised all the money to make it, and we hired some producers, and we hired a fantastic director named Jack Cooper Stimson. And our financiers, they're like these two lovely women, Carrie Ann Roshman and Kate Vanoff, and they're so supportive of our vision, and like they're so happy to be like helping us bring the story to life. Yeah. And we shoot it in the fall, and it's a father-son story, and we're going out to some really fantastic actors to play my dad. And I can't say their names out loud just yet, but so far it's pretty exciting.
What is it like to be acting in something that you wrote?
It's interesting, and in that it seems kind of like easy because the story, like, I know every layer of detail in the story, you know, like I know why every moment was written the way it's written.
Yeah. But
it's also scary because I've acted it so many times in my head, just writing it for the last year. I'm afraid that like I already burnt myself out on it. So time will tell.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because it's funny because we started, I was planning on asking you about it, but you gave me this natural segue because you said, I don't necessarily want my writing and my acting to overlap. And my first thought was, but they are.
Right. Yeah. My first outing as like a screenwriter, they are overlapping because I couldn't pass up the opportunity, I guess, you know. And we ended up pulling from like my real life experience of like my relationship with my father in order to tell this story. Wow. And it's like it's an opportunity for me as an actor. It's like I can really like go deep with this and like try to give like such an honest performance. And I just, if I wrote this story and someone else were acting it, I'd be really jealous. I think I could crank out stories that I would be happy to see another actor do, but that's not the case with this one.
Yeah. Well, good for you. Good for casting yourself and taking that on. And
thank you. Yeah. I'm my favorite casting director.
You have to be in this industry. You have to be. It's a good quality. What about, are there other aspects, obviously, so you act, you write, are there other things that you have your eye on that you're thinking, you know, you're so young and you've done so much, and this is a really kind of fertile, wonderful moment in your career. Are there other things that you have in mind, directing, producing, and anything else that's on the horizon for you that you'd like?
Yeah. I mean, in writing the script with my wife, we also just sort of like, we're like, oh, we'll just start our own production company because, you know, we're young kids in Hollywood and that's what you do. Yeah. So we started our production company, and this is actually going to be the first film under that banner. And the film's called Way Down Bundy, and our production company is called No Good Films. And once we do Way Down Bundy, once we do Way Down Bundy, and, you know, hopefully, fingers crossed, it comes out as we want it to, we hope to produce other movies under that banner, whether like I write it or my wife writes it, or, you know, we just get our hands on a really fantastic script that we like would love to help this up and coming filmmaker. We would love to like be sort of like an A24 or like a plan B, and, you know, like just tell great stories, whether we wrote them or acted in them or not.
Yeah. Those are both amazing aspirational targets. So that's great.
It's also kind of selfish because there's so much good material out there. Like I would love to, you know, be a part of it.
Yeah. What I can't even fathom. I want to just ask you like about yourself and your plans for the summer and what you want to do for fun. But because I feel like it sounds like all you've been doing is working, it's just been like nonstop work. And I know that when you're acting, it's feast or famine. Like you know, especially when you're kind of first getting out there and you just want to work. But have you had time to do other stuff and just like chill and, you know?
I'm not great at relaxing. And I think that's just because like, you know, it was like 8 years by the time I booked Fear Street. And that was 8 years of like just doing really like low budget things and stuff that I'm totally proud of course. But like just really small, intimate films, low budget, unpaid, low paid. That when I was actually doing a play when I booked Fear Street, and from the time that I was doing that play, I booked Fear Street, I had to quit the play. I've been so like just enamored with the process, and like I'm trying to use every little bit of traction that I have, you know. And I guess deep inside of me, I'm afraid if I like take like a month off or 2 weeks off, like I'm going to lose it, which is maybe that's unhealthy to an extent, but I am afraid of that.
Yeah, I get it. I think that anybody in any sort of creative position where you're really your own best advocate, you know, you said you're your favorite casting director and it's like a joke, but it's true. You kind of, it's a hustle. It's a hustle when you're a creative. And so I think that that's right. You can relax later. You can, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, my wife, she's, you know, fantastic for a ton of reasons, but she loves doing like one big vacation every year. And we've actually taken the last couple of years off just because of everything like Fear Street and COVID and all that.
Yeah.
So she's like, okay, when we wrap on Way Down Bundy, we're hopping on a plane and we're going to Bali for like 2 weeks. And I'm like, that sounds great. Let's do it.
Good for you. So it's
yeah, so
the distance.
Yeah. So feel free to join us. I mean, Bali's supposed to be great in the fall. So
I've been to Bali. I went in the summer. So I'm glad you're going in the fall.
Is it brutal?
Is what I will tell you. Yes, it's
okay.
Brutal, but beautiful. Brutal, but beautiful. No complaints.
Yeah, that's what we heard. So that's something to look forward to.
Yeah. What else? What haven't I asked you about that you want to tell us, whether it's about Fear Street or any of your other projects or just your life or anything?
Man, you've done a great job like asking me about the things I'm like super excited for.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, definitely, you know, I want to like go back and highlight like the Fear Street trilogy is just, you've seen all three and hopefully by now everyone has, but if you haven't and you're watching this, I mean, you're getting 3 completely different genre horror films that are so fun, so self-aware, so well made with a queer love story front and center. Yeah. They're so good. Like I really encourage everyone to watch them.
They're so good.
So good.
And the soundtrack is so good.
Oh, the soundtrack and the score, like especially in the second and third one, Marco Beltrami, our composer, his music is so unsettling and beautiful. It's like when you like start paying attention to it, it's like it's almost all you could like hear is like his wonderful score.
Yeah, and it's just there's a lot of depth. I would say there's a lot of heart. There's a lot of really, really, really brutally gory things. And it's also, this is a question you may not know the answer to and or won't be allowed to answer. It's open-ended in the end. And I'm wondering if maybe more Fear Street's coming after this.
Look, there's like upwards of like 100 Fear Street books.
Yeah.
There's lots of stories to be told. I can't personally say one way or the other what Netflix is thinking, but personally, I would love to see it go a little bit further, or even like whether you're seeing new characters or you're going back and you're seeing characters that we've already seen and loved.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I think there's more to mine there, in my humble opinion.
I agree. Yeah, maybe that if Netflix is watching, maybe that's the pitch that we need to explore more Peter and Caleb.
Yeah, definitely. It's an interesting pitch, you know. But people on Instagram, people are so nice and optimistic about like you know Peter, because the third one's not out as of this date that we're speaking. But people on Instagram like, oh, like you were such an asshole, but you were so much fun to watch. You know, I hope you come back. And I'm like, oh, I appreciate your optimism, but I think Peter's gone.
Yeah, I mean, that is what it's so also confusing when you start to think about the characters versus the actors, because it's like, right, so Peter is for sure gone, but we don't know if, you know, Jeremy's gone, and then we don't see you in the second one,
right?
And so then it's like a nice surprise when we see you again in the third one, and we're like, wait a minute, that's the jerk from the first one. He's back as a jerk in the third one, but a little bit less of a jerk. So
yeah, and he has a prosthetic. Yeah, it's not huge.
Well, I can't tell you how much I enjoyed the films and how excited I am for you and your career and how lovely you seem. And I just wish you the best of luck. And I'm so grateful for you joining us today.
Oh, thanks. I mean, right back at you, Carla. Like you are such a treat to talk to, and yeah, you're just such a real cool person. Like I would do this for every other project forever.
Thanks. All right, we'll pencil that in.
Yeah, cool.
Way Down Bundy. Cool.
Way Down Bundy. Yeah, let's keep that in mind.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.